It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I will be your host this morning. We're going to cover a group of topics that I think you'll find interesting and enlightening. For starters, we're going to tackle some issues on the historical start of what I believe will be a new revolution in the United States of America. Peaceful, but a revolution nonetheless. Perhaps not peaceful. We'll see as time goes on. But I believe that the Bundy Ranch is going to go down historically. And remember now that history is always rewritten by the victor, right? So it depends largely on the outcome here. But the Bundy Ranch is going to go down in history as the start, the Lexington green, if you will, the shot heard round the world of a new American revolution. I think the reason is because it is galvanized and it's a catalyst, and I don't mean that pun intended. It's a catalyst for the concerns of a vast number of Americans. A vast number of Americans who feel that we have reached the point of no return if we do not take immediate action to restore a semblance of republic to our country. And we're going to talk about that in our second segment because Princeton and Northwestern University, these are no community colleges of liberal academia. These are universities that have a massive influence and significant research capabilities. And they have made the following declaration. The United States is now an oligarchy and resembles not a republic, not even a democracy, but an oligarchy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not quite even sure how this study came to be done at Princeton and Northwestern because it is not the type of release that we would ordinarily see from this kind of an or these kinds of organizations. But nonetheless, their documentation and supporting information is empirical, and I got to tell you, when liberal universities, the bastions of the liberal stronghold in academia, are telling us that our nation has become an oligarchy and is no longer a republic, we must take a serious look at the evidence. Our third segment, the IRS, has signed on, along with a long list of other curse word agencies. I say that curse word because they're three-letter agencies. And ordinarily, we always hear the joke about, don't use four-letter words. Well, I got to tell you, I'm far more offended by the three-letter curse words of the agencies of the federal government than I am by any curse word that you could spell or use or prohibit being used on air. I got to tell you, folks, you should be too. The words that are and the acronyms that are used to define federal agencies should have Americans outraged. Outraged because they exist without authority. They exist without constitutional excuse for survival. The IRS is going to track your vehicle. And to make matters worse, they audit only 1% of the biggest partnerships that for all intents and purposes, are exactly what Princeton and Northwestern University are stating are the endangerment of our republic. Yet, when it came time for some 501c4, that's not even a tax-exempt organization, folks. When it came time for those organizations to be approved by the IRS, this administration used the IRS as a weapon against the American people to keep you in the dark, willfully, intentionally, purposefully. Our fourth segment is inflation is really 11%. Despite what the government tells you, they're using Common Core math by way of explanation. They're injecting the fallacy of Common Core into their mathematical equations to figure out inflation. Because, as anyone who's looked at Common Core really knows, it's not whether or not you actually get the answer right. It's did you follow the steps in the equation? Boom. The truth is, the federal government has removed from the inflation equation the two things that really matter. One, the cost of food, and two, the cost of fuel. Those are the two highest expenses that the average citizen incurs. So if you take those two out, you can make inflation look like 3 or 4%. Exactly what the numbers reflect today. If you go back and do the actual calculations that we've used in the 1980s, we would be at 11% per year since President Barack Obama usurped office. All right, let's break into our first topic this morning. There is a couple of things that we need to look at with relation to Bundy. One, Western states are utilizing the Bundy issue to galvanize action amongst themselves to take back possession of the land that has been usurped and stolen, frankly, from the states by the federal government. Why do I say that? And why do I say that the idea that the BundyRanch issue will become, for all intents and purposes, historically known as the beginnings of a new revolution in the United States? Well, it's important to note that it is the catalyst, the galvanizing force behind a number of actions. Number one, many of the states that are, for all intents and purposes, wholly owned subsidiaries of the federal government are seriously, and make no mistake, by the way, and I don't mean to imply that they haven't been looking at this before. The movement's been underway before. But it just got a shot on the arm of adrenaline that it had never had before. And that is where the critical issue comes into play. There is an article which I posted up on our Facebook and on our website from the Christian Science Monitor. And they detail the fact that the states are seriously looking at the retaking of federal land, not just from Nevada, but the western states, and Nevada is the worst, by the way. 84% of the state is owned by the federal government. I mean, that, ladies and gentlemen, that is insane. If you take away what is owned by government, by the federal government and the state government, there's very little left for people to own, or the counties themselves. And what we're looking at now is a move that is afoot to restore state ownership of property. Now, I got to tell you, and many of you probably didn't even know this, but in the last election, if you recall, Arizona, one of the states that is predominantly the owner of the Grand Canyon, attempted to take the Grand Canyon back from federal ownership. And they put it up for a state referendum, and they lost, believe it or not. The fools in the state determined that, yes, we should leave that in the hands of the federal government. Now, we have to recognize that if you look at what these coalitions of states are using as their incentive and their motivation to take property back from the federal government, they're looking at it in a couple of different ways. First and foremost, it's a function of who is a better husband of the land than the state. Certainly not the federal government. In fact, when you look at federal government and their management of property, they are considerably behind the states in terms of the level of improvements and the level of maintenance that they do. Ergo, you have these massive wildfires that burn through huge chunks of the states. One of the reasons is, and this isn't me saying this, these are the states themselves saying this, is that the federal government is so lax in their maintenance of these vast areas of uninhabited land that, quite frankly, wildfires that begin there have all of the fuel necessary because the federal government doesn't do anything about their goal is to leave it untainted, untouched. The states at least maintained it. Now, there's a map that accompanies this article, and it basically states that the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, national parks, and military bases encompass the following percentages. And I've seen the number for Nevada anywhere from 80 to 84%. This one says 81. So, but the point is, that's a chunk. I mean, that's a big, massive piece. Nevada, 81%. Alaska, 62%. Utah, 67%. Oregon, 53%. Idaho, 62%. Arizona, 42%. California, 48%. Wyoming, 48%. New Mexico, 35%. Colorado, 36%. Percentage. I mean, folks, that's insane. Now, Utah has been leading a legislative change, trying to get the federal government to relinquish control over these vast chunks of land. And they want to take back control for a couple of reasons. One, to better preserve and maintain those properties. Two, to be in control of who has access to them. In other words, one of the problems that we have here in the United States is an energy problem. No one would deny that. And there are vast storehouses of energy locked up underneath federal control that, if we look at what North Dakota has been doing and the control that they have exerted over their property and allowing natural gas and oil to be extracted from that property, first and foremost, they've become a boom state. It's the only state in the union that is actually racing ahead of every other state, with the exception perhaps of Texas. And Texas only because it's been, operational so long. But if you look at the vast resources, natural resources, of course, that are locked up in these huge expanses of property, you have to realize that these states look at that and say, that's a windfall for us if we can tap into that, and we can, one, break the logjam of energy dependence upon the Middle East, number one, which is a national security issue. I don't know why the federal government, well, I do know why, but the federal government refuses to break that chain. And the reason they do is, of course, because, as we're going to study in our next segment from Northwestern and Princeton University, we are ruled by corporate interests, not by the interests of of the American people or special groups within the American population. Even when we talk about like groups like the Tea Party or groups like liberal groups, you see, they're not really in control. And if the states had an opportunity to break the logjam of federal control over the natural resources within those properties, then, quite frankly, we would have a boom in energy in this country, number one. Number two, we would eliminate our necessity to rely upon Middle Eastern oil, which would create a national security, well, I don't want to say it would create a national security meltdown, because what it would actually do is place us in a position where we could tell the petrodollar folks in Saudi Arabia and the OPEC organization to go jump in the lake. In addition to that, the states would have better management over those properties. And, one of the arguments the federal government gives is, well, you can't maintain it because you don't have the money. Well, I disagree. Quite frankly, if the states had ownership of those properties that are already within their purview of their state boundaries, then they would have the resources available merely by being able to turn around and say, hey, we're going to cut a lease to company XYZ on this property, and we're going to receive a significant amount of money as a result, and we can apply that money to the maintenance and the preservation of that property. I believe that the states would do a far better job, albeit in a patchwork format, than the federal government does. We've seen what the federal government result is, and it's not good. We do like the idea that when you have an experiment, a 50-state or 57-state, if you're President Barack Obama, experiment happening, that some states will prove far more resourceful and resilient and capable than the federal government. One, local management is far more accessible to the people of that state. And so, therefore, when the people of the state have a need to make a change in how it's managed, for better or worse, they have the ability to do that. Trying to contact someone in Washington where your voice is drowned out by the walls of money is impossible. Now, Utah's been leading this charge, if you will, and they're calling there's a bill that has been signed into law by Utah Governor Gary Herbert back in 2012, and it's called the Transfer of Public Lands Act. And this is basically setting the stage for a showdown with the government, demanding that under threat of a lawsuit that the states can take the properties back. Other states are beginning to look at this and say, hey, well, maybe they've got something there. Now, the other aspect of this that is going to turn this into a revolutionary kickoff, if you will, is the fact that this has galvanized Americans in a way in which we have not seen around one issue. And it's short of, say, 9/11, where everybody seemed to be allied for a week or two. This is the first time we're seeing an alliance of Americans on both sides of the political ideological fence in cooperation against a federal policy. In other words, the stratified and compartmentalized breakup that's been accomplished, frankly, by the federal government has been the lines have been erased, and we're seeing a unified front by various organizations and groups and special interest groups within the demographic of the plain Jane citizens of the United States to come together and say something was desperately wrong with this situation. And it is the proof that was needed in many folks' minds to say we've reached the point of no return. It was also the first time that we have seen a physical confrontation in a standoff that incorporated the use of weaponry against overreach from the federal government. In modern times, there have been other revolts, if you will. There have been other attempts at revolution. The fact that this one ended peacefully is laudable, but in addition to that, it also places the individuals who were involved, not on the federal government side, but on the American people side, the moral high ground that the country has been looking for. You see, they've been turning over every rock, seeking something to put their hands around that says, this separates us, this raises us above the rabble-rouser category. Now, Harry Reid played right into it, calling anyone who supported the Bundys a domestic terrorist and repeatedly utilizing that refrain. He did more damage to the mask of the federal government than anything else. Almost as serious damage as the news reports where you watched federal agents assaulting innocent, peaceful protesters. Ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't get worse than that. See, Harry Reid is not only our worst enemy, he's his own worst enemy, and he's the worst enemy of this government. Because every time he opens his mouth, he inserts a foot. I've got to tell you, folks, we are going to see that this, over time, is going to be looked upon as the opening gambit, if you will, the initial chess move of a new revolution in the United States of America. And I cannot applaud that more. Of course, we want it to be peaceful. Of course, we seek for our government to hear our grievances and redress those grievances in a realistic manner. We know for a fact, unequivocally, that has not happened. And at this stage in the game, we now have to resort to other means. I think you'll find, as time moves forward, that this will be a new era in American government. A new era in the way in which people view their government, in which their sympathies lie with one side or the other, in which they are willing to participate, in which they are willing to throw off the chains of apathy. You know, I'm reminded of a study, a poll that was just recently taken that was astounding to me, in which 37% of America now states that they empirically fear the federal government. 47% don't, and 17% are unsure. So let's just quickly analyze that before the end of the segment. 47% that support it, or don't fear it, I should say, suspiciously corresponds to the number of people who are utterly dependent upon the government. 17% represents those who are totally asleep at the wheel and have no clue that we even have a government, what it is, and who's running it. And 37% represents those who pay all the bills, keep the lights on, actually vote only one time, and defy the propaganda that's fed to them by 6, soon to be 5 with the new merger between Comcast and Time Warner, the 6 megalithic pillars of the Ministry of Propaganda. America, now is the time for a vast uprising of the folks who actually count. And it's simple. If we stop feeding the beast, because we're the ones who are paying for it all, if we stop feeding the beast, even the 47% who support it will turn on it once the freebies stop coming. We should be enlisting those folks by attrition, not by appealing to their sense of right or wrong or justice. Here's the reason why. They mistakenly think justice and right or wrong are issued with the return address of a state or a federal capital. We have the numbers. We have the money. We have the righteous moral high ground. We have the law. It's called the Constitution. We have ethics, and we have our natural and God-given rights. It's time for a liberal application of the paint of patriotism and constitutionality. Those commercials are painless for you. You gotta love that. You're listening to America's Voice. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host here, and we're gonna tap into a very unusual but interesting study. And it's one that has gotten, no real press. Isn't that surprising? Wow. there's a new study out from Princeton and Northwestern universities. And what's interesting about it is that these two schools of higher learning, if you will, would ordinarily not be construed to be on the conservative side of the political ideological fence. If anything, they would fall under the liberal bastion category. Princeton and Northwestern have declared the U.S. government is no longer a republic, it is now an oligarchy. Now, let's define oligarchy for a minute so that we understand what that is. An oligarchy, and the term originates from the Russian Duma and the takeover of the Tsarist republic or Tsarist monarchy, I should say, back in 1917. And the idea of an oligarchy is that you have a small collective entourage of people that run a government for their own purposes, for their own advancement, their own personal improvement, feathering their own nests, if you will, with both power and money. And an oligarchy is different than a dictatorship, because a dictatorship is traditionally one person with a small group of advisors, or a family, if you will, that runs a nation. And all of it, of course, involves the key operative word of tyranny, but that goes without saying. Or as we used to say when I was back in the East, that goes without saying. So the concept here is that an oligarchy, or alternatively referred to as a corporatocracy, is an important word for you to understand. Because a corporatocracy and an oligarchy are more closely allied or aligned than would be a dictatorship. A dictatorship is a government that is run by an individual or a family, whereas an oligarchy and a corporatocracy are more like a fascist co-joining of government and industry or business. This study is very clear that the United States government more closely resembles an oligarchy or a corporatocracy than a republic or a democracy. The researchers from this study did, and it's rather lengthy, they reviewed 2,000 policy changes. Now, notice that these are policy changes, not laws. And here's where we're going to get into the thick of this thing, because I want you to recognize and understand utilizing your critical thinking skills. And I posted this article. It's from Ben Swan. And, of course, there's a link to the actual study itself from Princeton EDU. But the important thing is that I want you to understand that policy is not law. And yet, policy parades about as law, carries all the weight of law, and yet doesn't have the provenance of law. What do I mean by that? Okay. Law can only be passed, according to our own Constitution, by Congress. Right? Provenance of law shows, like the provenance of art or the provenance of a manuscript, is a chain of command, if you were, or not, a chain of possession. So it shows the historical record of ownership or existence. Where did it come from? How was it born? What is the authority or the assurance that is genuine? That's provenance, right? When you look at a piece of art, you go back to that art and you say, the provenance of this art is that it has been established as legitimate, it's not a fraud, it's not a fake, it's not a forgery, and we can prove that not only because we've had, experts look at it and review it and say, yes, these are original pigments that were used back in the time of the great artist, and by comparing it, but also in addition to that, we can show the chain of ownership that establishes that this is a legitimate piece of art and its provenance. Policy changes are forgeries, if you will, of law. This study reviewed and examined 2,000 policy changes that have been in place since 1981 to 2002. And they compared the changes to the preferences of average Americans, the wealthy citizenry, and interests and lobbyist groups. Here's what they found out. They were looking to find the answers on who actually is it that's in charge of the country. I mean, who supports and controls, if you will, the nation? Who rules? And to what extent is the principle of the consent of the governed honored? Well, guess what? We lose, which should come as no surprise to you, but we lose. They analyzed 4 theoretical traditions in American politics, and I don't want to get into the weeds on this. I'm going to review it with you briefly, but I don't want to get into the weeds of looking at what each of these contains. But these 4 principles and theoretical traditions are called majoritarian electoral democracy, economic elite domination, and 2 different types of interest groups, one called majoritarian pluralism and biased pluralism. So basically, the researcher, or one of the researchers, sums it up this way. The central point that emerges from our research is that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impact on U.S. government policy, while mass-based interest groups and average citizens have little or no independent influence. Wow. Average citizens, even mass-based interest groups, have little or no independent influence. If you want proof that the eco-terrorists and eco-tyrants who are ravaging our land, when I say ravaging our land, I mean ravaging the property rights of individuals. If you want proof that these are not mass-based interest groups, but are specifically a portion of these interests and lobbyist groups which are run by corporations. See, and the political elite. Realize something. The mass-based interest groups in the United States don't have any power, nor do the average citizens. The mass-based interest groups are other groups, not the eco. Here's a perfect example. How many people in the United States would think that having the ability to label our food as to whether or not it contains a genetically modified organism is a good thing? I mean, the average person would look at that and say, sure, I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be on the label that this contains something that I may find that I don't want to participate in, or I may find I don't think is healthy for me. And yet, we cannot get labeling implemented here in the United States of America. Why? Because it's a mass-based interest group of the general population, of the average citizens. And it has little or no influence and power over what really happens. However, ConAgra, Monsanto, Dow, Syngenta, all of these companies, they all have massive influence, which they bought with money. The evidence that they find in this study supports the theories of economic elite domination and biased pluralism, but not for theories of majoritarian electoral democracy or majoritarian pluralism. The key difference in the theories is the power and influence that wealthy individuals yield versus the average or the median voter. So here's what you need to recognize that comes out of this. We, as a collective group of individuals, including general mass interests in interest groups within the voter base that don't have a wealthy corporate backing, we have zero power. Doesn't matter what we collectively think is good or bad. What matters is whether or not you've got the money to pay Congress to institute your unique vision of what the country should be. That's why you have these environmentalists who are able to accomplish, even though they are a very, very small minority, amazing things like the protection of a tortoise in the middle of a desert that is actually enhanced by the feeding of cattle, not reduced. You see, they have an enormous amount of money behind them for one purpose, to implement the concepts and the principles and the tenets of the Agenda 21 goals that have been outlined for us in writing since the 60s. The idea that massive areas of the United States should be left to go back to wildlands, if you will, while humanity in its collective destructiveness is collected into these small, population centers where, one, we are easily controlled and the damage that we can accomplish is, limited, shall we say. You see, here's the problem. We as a collective group can get together all we want, but unless we're willing to back up our demands with what? Force, then we are voiceless. I'm going to clarify for you in just 1 minute what I mean by that. But I want you to hear the next paragraph in this statement, in this article from Swan. This is on Ben Swan, by the way. Despite past researchers suggesting that policy changes are the result of, quote, collective preferences, end quote, or that liberalism and conservatism in politics is representative of the views of citizens, the Princeton study suggests, quote, that reality is best captured by mixed theories in which both individual economic elites and organized interest groups, including corporations largely owned and controlled by the same wealthy elites, play a substantial part in affecting public policy. But the general public has little or no independent influence. The researchers' findings indicate that when a majority of citizens disagree with the economic elite and call for policy change, they rarely get it. They blame, quote, the strong status quo bias built in to the U.S. political system. Now, let me clarify for you what I meant when I said the only way for us to evoke change, to force change upon a federal government that, quite frankly, doesn't heed our request or even our demands for change. Remember that the general public has little or no independent influence until we do what? We begin to back our demand for change with force. Why is that? Because government is force, and it only knows and respects and responds to force. Now, what does that mean for us? It means that we need to change the tactics that we use in order to restore our national government back to its constitutional guidelines and put the Constitution in its rightful place as the document that limits government. Remember, The Constitution is not a limiting document based on our limitations. It's a document intended to limit government, to bind men down with the Constitution, the chains of the Constitution. That was Jefferson. That's not me. Jefferson recognized and saw that the only way for the American people to retain a level of control over the force of government, to keep the fire contained within the fireplace, if you will, right? To keep the campfire contained within the circle of rocks, is by utilizing force. Because he contends himself, George Washington stated for us emphatically that government is force. It's the only thing that government is. It's not reason, and it's like fire. It can be helpful, but it is also very, very dangerous. And now we see that because we have not instituted a circle of rocks, a framework of brick to contain that fire, we have lost control of it. And it is burning down our house. The only way for us to regain control of that force, and in this case to follow the analogy of fire, is to douse it, to put it out. How do we do that? Well, for starters, we starve it. We starve it of fuel, and we starve it of food. Fuel is its food. Its food and its fuel are you, money, and your apathy and your acquiescence. When you cease to be willing to go along with what you know to be wrong, when you cease to continue to allow your money to be used to essentially create your own demise, then and only then will we be able to make an impact and see the fire begin to recede. We have to use force, however, to control it. We have to begin to douse it. We have to begin to starve it of fuel. In addition to that, there are times when just starving it of fuel is not enough. I'll give you an example. When you look at a fire in a wild scenario where it's in a large forest, what does forest ranger or forest firefighters do? They cut what's called a fire break, right? They go in there with a bulldozer and they just plow a road. And the idea is that if we can get this road to act as a fire break, that the fire won't continue to spread in that direction. Now, oftentimes they're successful. Sometimes they're not. The goal is to create a disruption so that the fire can't continue to grow along the ground. Sometimes the fire leaps over the fire break. And you see, we've been attempting to put fire breaks in our society now for a very, very long time. But we've been trying to do it the wrong way. We've been trying to do it by a general public outcry and protesting, which doesn't matter because politicians don't get their bribes paid by your voice. They get their bribes paid for by a corporatocracy who's willing to put their money where they want the politician's mouth to be. The fire breaks we've attempted have been done with a snow shovel when they need to be done with a road grader or a plow. We need to starve the fire of fuel. And there are times, and I'm going to use the perfect example of the Bundy Ranch scenario, when force applied appropriately and in measured response can be a very, very valuable tool. You see, even when we, as a majority, we demand economic change, or we demand policy change, or we demand a change in the behavior of those allegedly called their representatives, we very, very rarely get it because we cannot compete with the economic elite, with the corporatocracy. So there are a couple of other measures that we can do that will bring the fight to them. What is that? Well, for starters, we can start going after the corporations themselves. What do I mean by that? Well, there are a significant number of corporations in the United States of America that create products and services which are diametrically opposed to your freedom. I submit to you the companies that produce the products that are used to spy on you, to build cameras that are used to leech revenue from you. I'm just throwing some examples out there. There are many of them, thousands of them. There are massive companies out there who you buy their products and then they take the profits and they bribe Congress to do that which is against your best interest. Starve them as well. I got to wrap this because we're at the very end of this, and I want to finish this article. There was a telling quote that concludes the study. And here's what it is. We believe that if policymaking is dominated by powerful business organizations and a small number of affluent Americans, then America's claim to being a democratic society are seriously threatened. Here's what you need to recognize. I expect politicians to be corrupt because they always have been, and because power corrupts and money is an easy way to achieve that. So what I'm suggesting, America, is that you rethink the issue and we start applying our efforts not necessarily towards protesting government, but we apply our efforts towards stripping the corporatocracy of the resources to continue to bribe them, and we apply measured force legitimately and authoritatively where it's necessary. That will be the beginning of a change in how government responds to us. Because we will be building, one, the fire break, and two, we will have the tools at hand to be able to douse that fire, pull away its fuel, and starve it to death. I've got to tell you, we're out of time as a nation. And whether or not you perceive or choose to understand and recognize the exigent danger that we're in, the danger close danger that we are in, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It only means that we're going to have to strategize uniquely and differently, or we're going to lose this war. And I've got to tell you something, folks. It's time you began to look at this for what it is. This is a war. It is a war for the future of our nation. It's sad, but it's true. The question becomes, will we continue to stand in line like the British soldiers of old and await our death by a volley of bullets flying up at us? Or will we get smart and, like the colonists, determine that we can do this in a much better fashion via the guerrilla warfare method? Aha! Therein, ladies and gentlemen, therein lies the truth. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle our third topic. The IRS is tracking your vehicle now. Huh? You're kidding, right? No, I'm not. We'll be right back. You're listening to America's Voice Now.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I am glad to be here this morning with you. You're joining us in the third of our 4 segments this morning, and we've been discussing 2 earlier segments, the Bundy Ranch and how it is to be the start, the historical start, going back in history now, assuming that we can get Common Core out of the classroom. We might actually see the history books properly reflect the Bundy Ranch issue for what it was. That is the beginnings of a new American Revolution, one that will incorporate, the vast American populace outraged at the abuse of federal government, whether they sit on the left or the right or the liberal or the conservative ideological side, and 2, the use of force to withstand the onslaught. Now, in our second segment, we talked about a new study by Princeton and Northwestern University that empirically and emphatically declares that the United States government is no longer representative of the principles of republicanism, but that it is now an oligarchy. Wow. I mean, Princeton and Northwestern would be construed by anyone to be among the bastions of liberal academia. In this segment, we're going to talk about one of the ways in which the government is applying pressure to us and using force and, quite frankly, violence to achieve their ends, and how you have an opportunity, amongst other things, to begin to fight back against this using the tactics we're talking about. 1, starving that which is, quite frankly, paying for our demise. In other words, in order for an oligarchy or a corporatocracy to work, the corporate entities and the ultra-wealthy individuals who, for all intents and purposes, are steering us in policy and what have you, those individuals are using money to accomplish that goal, to remake and to commission. Think of it like that, right? They're commissioning a piece of art to be drawn up in the image that they perceive the United States to be, or what they would like it to look like. Our job, our goal, is to thwart that by any means necessary. And one of the ways in which we can do that is not only by starving the beast of the government itself by taxation, where that is how they're instituting your own demise by making you pay for it, but also by going after the assets and the corporations who have the resources to pay government to implement their envisionment of whatever tyrannical disaster they've got planned for us. Now, you have to realize that the title of this segment is "The IRS is going to track your vehicle." Now, really, what does that have to do with taxation? Well, you see, it's not really. The reason I put that in there is because I wanted to draw your attention to it. But it's only one of multiple facets of this blood diamond. And when I say a blood diamond, I mean it's a diamond tainted with the blood of Americans. You are being stripped. You are being, the very lifeblood of the nation is being drawn off. How do I mean that? Well, I posted an article up this morning on our website and Facebook page and so forth about how today the average credit card percentage of interest is a stunning 21%, ladies and gentlemen. When you sign on for a new credit card, forget that 6-month window where there's no interest or any other nonsense. If you read the fine print and you look at the interest rate that you're paying on credit cards, the banks are squeezing you for every last possible drop of blood from the American consumer. They're only one microcosm of the corporatocracy that are doing that to you. But realize that they are in large part taking the profits and they are funding the corporatocracy of government that has become the oligarchy that we hate and abhor. They're using your own money to bribe politicians and officials and policy that is directly resulting in your enslavement. Hello? The point of all of this is that we need to begin to think of how we monkey wrench our way into causing damage to those who are either open participants or assistive of our enslavement. You can monkey wrench the system. You can do that in large part by refusing to play the game by their rules. First and foremost, any one of you who are listening to the sound of my voice right now, if you do not realize that eliminating credit cards from your life is wise, I guess that's the basic premise that you must accept. In other words, debt is the primary cause of your enslavement. And it's the primary method to keep you from breaking free and swimming to the surface. It's like a stone, a millstone about your neck. You cannot escape the clutches of the lender when you are indebted to them, because you are consistently forced to bend to their will in order to accomplish the payback of that debt. And they know it, and that's why they've applied it that way. Eliminate credit cards from your life. Period. End of argument. I'm not saying that you can't keep one for emergencies, car rentals, a hotel, you want to go on vacation, those kinds of things. I mean, there are times when a credit card is necessity almost in our daily lives. And I'm not suggesting that, we all fall back into the 1800s and start riding horses and, become Amish. But there should be no debt in your life, which means that credit card should only be used for the most absolute minimal necessities or requirements in which you have it, and that you pay it off immediately, and that you take all the rest of them that you own and cut them up. Why? Because banks are living on you, and they're taking the profit of you as they farm you. You are the crop. Don't you see? You're the crop. They farm you, and the fruit that you bear is 21% interest. They take that 21% interest, and they turn around and they give it to a politician to influence his decisions, applying to banking rules themselves. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, it's an insane cycle of destruction. How can I say that? Well, did you know that a Bank of America has just agreed to pay $727 million over their illegal credit card practices? That's $727 million. Did you know that Bank of America has agreed to pay out a second $800 million settlement to the Consumer Fraud and Protection Bureau? By the way, you're not getting any of that. Hello. Here's what you have to realize. These credit card companies the average interest rate is 21%. That's up 2% over what it used to be just a year ago as an average. What you don't realize is that They are, first of all, if you committed fraud to the level of $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion. That's what Bank of America. You'd be in jail for life. You'd be Bernie Madoff. Why is it that Bank of America just pays a fine, which is, for all intents and purposes, only a portion of the profits that they've gained? Because they've gone to the legislators and paid to make sure that their senior executive management don't go to jail. The truth is, you'd go to jail. Allowing a corporation to escape prison time for fraud and theft by deception is unconscionable. Allowing any corporation to get away with that is irresponsible. It is unethical, immoral, illogical. These corporations that are providing products and services and then using the money from those products and services to fund your demise and enslavement should be removed from the equation. Vigilant. This is a company who is providing license plate tracking services, not just for the IRS, but you won't believe this. The IRS and other agencies awarded $415,000 in contracts to this company, and its office is like Forest Service, U.S. Air Force Air Combat Command. Why is Vigilant, a closely held company, gaining contracts which look, this is the equivalent. I want you to draw this analogy. You are in Europe. You live in Europe. You are in a Nazi-occupied nation. France. Pick it. I mean, it doesn't have to be France. It could be Poland. It could be any other country. And it doesn't have to only be the Nazis. It could have been the USSR. You are under occupation by an enemy. What do you do? Well, the first thing that you do is, as a partisan, you attempt to work to undermine the actual pillars of the infrastructure that is causing your nation to be enslaved. It's called partisanship. Not partisanship as in, I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican. Partisanship is as in the resistance. And that's what I want you to walk away from this with. Vigilant, a closely held company based out of, I believe they're in California. Incorrect, I could be wrong, but it doesn't even matter. We can find them. Here's the point. Vigilant has received these contracts, all of them since 2009, with the advent of the usurper-in-chief. Jay Johnson, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, he ordered the cancellation of an immigration agency plan that was aiming to buy access to national license plate data. The point is that Vigilant owns all of this plate data, and they sell it to government agencies. If you lived in occupied Poland, if you lived in occupied Denmark, if you lived in occupied Sweden, if you lived in occupied France, I'm going to tell you that at the time of World War II, what people did as partisans in those days was to go out and find the perpetrators and change their behavior, and failing that, they just removed them. Now, am I suggesting and inciting you to go create some kind of an illegal? Of course not. What I am saying is that Vigilant should be exposed for who and what they are, and that we and the people in the state where Vigilant is headquartered, which I believe, and I'll find out for you exactly where they are, but my point is that the state where that is hosted, where that company is based out of, should be doing everything in their power to apply all the pressure to put them out of business. I don't care what the excuse is. Find a reason to investigate them. Find a reason to shut them down for health care, for the Department of Health. Find a dirty cafeteria. Go in there and find a building code violation and shut them down. They're only one example. There are literally tens of thousands of companies around here that are doing that are working against you, supporting, aiding, and abetting the enemy of the people of the United States of America. Some of them are vast corporatocracies. Some of them are these tiny companies. But I'm telling you that you and I need to recognize that we can apply the same pressure back that they're applying to us. We can expose these people. Protest in front of the senior management of Vigilant, and let's make sure that that there are protests set up in front of their home, and that there are articles written in newspapers around the nation about them. And I'm going to try to find Vigilant. All I can find is, all right, I'll have to find it at a later date for you. I can't find it immediately. My point is this. They're gaining these contracts for selling your information. So stop them from selling your information. Are you in charge of the utility company in the area? When they fail to get their electric bill in on time and they're 1 hour late, shut them off. Hello. When you are the city utility master and they have failed to pay their water bill, shut it off. Don't give them 5 minutes of leeway. Put in the order immediately and terminate their service. You see, there are a million ways in which you can do harm to them legally, peacefully. I'm not suggesting that we resort to something else. I am telling you that they're using these systems, they're using these methodologies to injure us. And at this point, ladies and gentlemen, it's now self-defense. It is now self-defense. The Forestry Service, the Department of Agriculture, these are agencies which use vigilant services. The Department of Agriculture? I mean, why do they have to track you? They scan license plate numbers, they compare the data to law enforcement lists of wanted vehicles, and they send alerts when such vehicles are detected, according to the company's website. You see, the problem that we have is that we have traitors among us. And like the occupied nations of Europe from World War II, we should be taking a lesson in partisanship. Because they were occupied on a level in which they were killing their populace, I'm not suggesting that we need to resort to that same level of action. But there are plenty of ways in which pressure can be applied to expose these people for what they are. And either force them out of business, find an excuse and a way in which you can file a lawsuit against them. Just tie them up in the courts. It's called monkey wrenching, sand in the gears. Shut their power off. Shut their water off. If you are a person who is sitting on a city council, find that they have or extended beyond their authority within the community boundaries that you have, or whatever it is. I don't care what it is. Find ways, if you're where Vigilant is, find ways that you can prohibit these companies and cause them pain. It's the death of 10,000 cuts. It's not one cut. It's the death of 10,000 cuts. File a Freedom of Information Act. Now, they're a closely held company. So what information do they have on you? File a lawsuit to find out. They're going to deny Freedom of Information Act. They're going to say, we're not a government agency. We don't have to respond to that. And we're privately held. We're not even open to the public. So we don't have to give you any information at all. Okay, great. Well, I have standing in the court, and I'm going to file a lawsuit to find out exactly what you do have about my license plate and who gave you authority to capture it. I don't care if you do it under flippin' copyright law. Figure out a way. Pay some attorney if you have to, or find an attorney who's actually constitutionally aware. I know there's only about 11 of them in the country, but find one of the 11 and get them to help you. The point is, we have to find out who the traitors are amongst us and shut them down. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. I don't know what other companies Vigilant is involved in. I don't know what other... There's another company... well, all right, look, here's the point. The point is that we have to start playing and taking an active role in resistance as partisans, monkey-wrenching the system every way, everywhere, any way that we can. Whatever it takes, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever it takes. Do it legally. Do it peacefully. We're not going to go out there and commit violence. I'm not suggesting that we should. I'm not saying that there's no place for violence. I'm telling you that now is not the window for that. I've had people say to me, "Why do you say that?" Well, because if I don't, one of two things: I'll either be accused of inciting violence, or I'm accused by those who would support violence, inaccurately, by the way, that there is a place for violence. Of course there is. It's not yet. Will it come to that? I believe it will, but today is not that day. That's the truth, folks. Today's not that day. There are a lot of things that we can do to drag Gulliver down. The question is, are we willing to do it, or are we going to wait for, the inevitable to happen? Are we going to allow these companies that are growing up around us to become tyrannical on their face while we are paying the price? Folks, a decision is going to have to come down to you. There's no mass group that's going to organize, and as we just learned from the previous segment, there's no group that's going to really come up here and save your butt. Either you're going to rise up and save it yourself, or you may as well kiss it goodbye. The problem is that in doing so, you're kissing it and all of future generations goodbye as well. I think you owe all of us better than that. We'll be back in just a moment. In our final segment, you're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm the host here. We work real hard to keep you educated and informed. This is an effort by. There are people that actually step up to the plate from time to time and help physically. There are a lot of people that take an active interest in this program. But I got to tell you, folks, we could sure use some support from our listenership in terms of financial resources. I don't get paid to do this, never have, and it's not likely that it'll ever will. But that's not what this is about. This is about education and information, and enlightening those people around us so that we are adding to the vast army of Americans who say, we're not going to take it anymore. And when you look at, how much you spend to support these same companies that are seeking your demise, I got to ask you, can't you portion some of that off to us and just go without on something? Really? Whatever it is in your life that you spend money on, that you classify as disposable income, you could share some of that with AVN, because we're so underfunded. I pay the difference out of my pocket every month, which is stunning. There are some folks, and I'm certainly not denigrating from these people who do. We've got folks that have allied on our website where they make a pledge of $10 or $20 a month. And there have been some folks who stepped up in a larger way and said, here's some support that you need. And I don't want to take anything from those folks. But I got to tell you, for all the thousands of people that hear these different messages, where are you? I'm not your preacher in church asking you to donate into the kitty so that we can, fund a lavish lifestyle or something. Really. I mean, our costs exceed the donations that we receive every month by orders of magnitude. I'm just saying. In this segment, we're going to talk about inflation and how it's really 11%. But the federal government is using Common Core math to justify calling it 3 or 4%. It's all a lie. And it's a lie because, well, quite frankly, you keep falling for it. You see, if we were to use the same calculations that we used in the 1980s, when inflation was actually 20%, well, it wasn't quite 20, but interest rates were 20%. The inflation rate was much, much higher than it is today. But they used the ability to, or they used an equation that they've changed the basic format of to calculate it. And, if you allow these corporatocracies, and I incorporate, when I say that, I'm talking about government and corporations that are using the principles of propaganda against you. If you allow them to continue to play you for a fool, at some point, I got to tell you, I sometimes wonder if, America really cares, or is it just a small? I gave you that statistic earlier in one of the earlier programs about the new 37% of voters fear the federal government, 47% don't, and 17% are unsure. Okay, that 17% must be the people who look at a picture of Joe Biden and say, game show host. Really. How can you live in a country and not know by looking at pictures who the individuals are that run it? They can't tell you how many people are in the Senate. They can't tell you, it's just incredible. They're asleep. But they're also asleep because they want to consistently and continue to believe what they're being told by these corporatocracies that are influencing everything that you see and hear and read. It's the ministry of propaganda. If food and fuel were added back into the equation, as they were in the 1980s, then we would be at 11% annually since Barack Obama has taken office. That means that since 2009, we've seen a 55%. 55%. It's all a lie. You have to realize that the calculation for inflation was changed not just to misdirect you, but because so much of government's expenses towards us, including Social Security checks and, funding that the government pays towards schools and hospitals and medical care and all these other things, all of it is based on inflation numbers. So the government has a conflict of interest and a motivation to defraud you, quite frankly, into believing that those numbers are lower than they are. It keeps their costs down, which enables them to spend more of your money in a reckless fashion on other things. Like, some study of fish or something. If food and fuel were added back into the equation, and we use the same mathematical calculations that we used in the 1980s, we would be at 11% annually. Now, Common Core is a new application of the principles of mathematics, which makes no sense because if you ever looked at some of the equations, the teachers actually come right out and say, but it's not whether or not the children get the right answer. It's did they follow the process? And if you've ever looked at a mathematical word problem in Common Core, you'd look at it, and I don't care if you're a math major from MIT. You look at it and you're like, what did they just say? I mean, it's not just 2 + 2 = 4 anymore. You've got these convoluted 20-step process to figure out how 2 + 2 = 4. And at the end of the day, you're so confused by the third or fourth step, you just give up in frustration. But it's not whether or not you can get 2 + 2 = 4. They don't care if you come out with 7, as long as you followed the process, which is really what it's all about. It's subterfuge. It's misdirection. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we are looking at with the inflation number that is thrown in front of us. They use Common Core mathematics, this convoluted, long process, to confuse. It's the old adage of, if you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, baffle them with your BS. And we've long ago lost the dazzle of their brilliance because there isn't any. And now many Americans, 37% in fact, are completely educated to the lack of brilliance. So now we're down to the baffle them with BS part. It's a lie to keep you dumbed down and quiet. Because if Americans actually thought we had 11% inflation and they ever sat down and did the math, they'd be standing outside of Washington and our state capitals with torches and pitchforks demanding that the dagnab monster was sent out for destruction. But they want you calm, and they want you lulled into submission while your mind is altered with drugs and propaganda. Why do I interject that? I posted an article this morning how 5% of the world's population is the United States. But we consume 50% of all pharmaceutical drugs manufactured in the world. Really? 50%? Folks, nobody's missed the old concept that, the Soviets would take somebody and seat them in a chair and strap them in and, hold their eyes open with toothpicks and show them a movie while giving them drugs, mind-altering drugs. That at the end of the day, they got out and they were a zombie and, they could be sent out as an agent and living here in the United States, let's say, and, they pick up the telephone and they hear the word bananas, ice cream, and, hemp. And suddenly they go off on a murderous rampage. Don't you see? You are being mind controlled. You are being brainwashed in a stunning and quite honestly heinous, inhumane way. A combination of drugs and propaganda can get you to believe anything. Even the most stalwart person cannot fight against that inevitably, forever. If you were to ask someone who's been trained in in escape and evasion, and ask them about whether they would be able to hold out against elongated torture, they would tell you, heck no, no one can. If you were to ask them, can you hold out against brainwashing techniques that we use as a government against them or they use against us, they would tell you, absolutely not. And they're trained and skilled and given the tools to at least put up a defense. You, on the other hand, have none of those tools. You have none of that training. And you are in the perfect position to be used, frankly. You are drugged up by a medical system that is enriching itself and enriching the drug companies that are producing. Have you noticed that stuff that is for like a liver problem advertised on TV has all of the warnings of an antidepressant? Have you noticed the gamut of antidepressants out there? Have you noticed that every antidepressant carries a warning of suicidal ideations? Have you noticed that everyone who's committed a mass murderous crime was on a cocktail of those? Have you noticed that everybody who's coming back here from the war and committing suicide with PTSD is on a cocktail of those drugs? If you don't think it matters, you're fooling yourself. You are being drugged into submission. And you are being mind altered, and your mind is being controlled by a combination of drugs and propaganda. The techniques are old news, folks. But the advent of doing it on a national scale, that is something different. That is something altogether recent. And I've got to tell you, the results are speaking for themselves. Look around you. Your masters are very pleased with your apathetic response. Our founders would have been shooting by now. I saw a kind of a unique meme that was out there where Barack Obama was saying that, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon Martin, et cetera, et cetera. And I saw one that showed a picture of Thomas Jefferson, and he said, if I had a son, he'd be shooting by now. And he would have. We are being brainwashed, indoctrinated. It is everything that surrounds you now. Television, the education in our schools, what you hear on the radio, what you read in the papers, the books that you read, the social commentary, the social media that you play with or live with or endlessly subject yourself to. The studies that are coming out about people's interactions with their personal tracking devices. I mean, I don't even want to, get conspiratorially minded enough to say that social media was an invention of government to encapsulate and enslave everybody, because I don't think that that's the case. But boy, when they saw what an impact it had, they changed their plan to incorporate it and to benefit from its use, because they realized what a powerful tool it is, what a powerful weapon of suicide it is. You are committing slow suicide. If you think smoking cigarettes is dangerous for you, you forget it. Just play with Facebook on your NSA personal tracking device. I mean, your cell phone. Yeah, that's what I mean. Same thing. NSA sponsored. Why is the price of cellular service so cheap? Because, well, they want everybody to have one. Because it's easy to track us geographically, as well as mentally, as well as politically. Folks, the truth is that everything that you hear, everything that you see, every word from government, every word from the mainstream ministry of propaganda, mass media, all of it is a lie. Inflation is not 4 and 5%, it's 11%. And it has been for the past 5 years of Barack Hussein Obama's reign. George Bush, by the way, was no better. Don't make any mistakes and think that I support Republicans. They're both traitors, should all be charged with treason for aiding and abetting the enemy, for plotting and planning against the demise or for the demise of the United States of America, charged, convicted, and then hung. Yeah, I just said it. Upon a conviction, they should all be put to death. That's harsh? Too bad. That's truth, ladies and gentlemen. Everything else is propaganda. Everything else that you see, all the admonitions to everything that you think you've been taught. Why is it that you're always taught, avoid conflict, don't be confrontational? Because they don't want you to see and feel your power. Power doesn't come from meekly standing there holding a sign that says, I protest, I protest. Force and power, as government well knows, come from the point of a gun. And they always have. They always will. Your government uses force and the police power to enforce their edicts upon you. You can now only speak when you're inside of a free speech zone fence. I mean, and dare you step out of it and you tasered or arrested or hauled off or fined or some other way punished? Tell me that's not force. Tell me that's not violent force if you resist. We've gone over the cliff. That's the truth. The only thing left for us to do now is determine whether or not we're going to land on top or land on the bottom. We have, for all intents and purposes, allowed our nation to be taken from us and stripped of any semblance of the Republican form of government that we've been guaranteed by our Constitution and gifted by nature and God. We don't need to be We don't need to be concerned about from where did those rights come. I think people get too caught up in trying to analyze it. I don't think it matters. The fact of the matter is that all humans have them. We all have the inherent right to self-defense. And that means self-defense of us individually and collectively as a group. And when our group of the governed is threatened by the government that we elected originally as the consent of the governed, we're done. If treason and the laws surrounding it and the concepts and the tenets of treason were applied to today's politicians, you as a jury member, forgetting all of the nonsense that you'd be indoctrinated with by a court system, just looking at the raw facts without a judge trying to tell you, you're not allowed to look at that, trying to direct you, nudge you, herd you in one way or another, you would find the people that are in power guilty of treason. And they are. They are. The only thing left at this stage for us to do is to determine what we're going to do about it. And I think it's way past time for us to determine that we would rather die than live as slaves. That, at least, is my choice. I hope you feel the same way. You've been listening to America's Voice. You can communicate with me directly by sending me email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. Please support our efforts in any way, shape, and form that you can. You can visit our website, and you can place a donation with us through our PayPal services, or you can mail it directly to us at P.O. Box, America's Voice Now, P.O. Box 1195, West Plains, Missouri, 65775. Thank you very much. Have a great day. God bless. If you're listening to us on Big Country 99, please make sure that you support and work with our vendors and our supporters and our advertisers. These are the folks that keep us on the air. I'd like to throw a special shout out there to West Plains Rental and Supply. If you need a skid loader, backhoe, any kind of tools or big equipment, they've got it over there. You can give Jeff a call at West Plains Rental and Supply. They're on East 3rd Street in West Plains, 256-0017. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Wits End Classic Barbershop. If you need to call over there for any reason, you can at 417-372-2027. And while you're there, swing into Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop and make sure that you get yourself or your significant other anything that you have an interest in the tobacco world. If you have an issue that needs legal attention, I encourage you to call the law offices of Jason Henry. He is located on Court Square in West Plains, right across the street from the courthouse. He handles state and federal cases, both civil and criminal. If you've gotten some kind of a federal criminal charge, a state criminal charge, give him a call at 417-256-4100. If you have a case involving custody of children, marital separation or divorce, or anything along those lines, he handles those types of cases as well as also automobile cases as well. So give him a call at 417-256-4100. Make sure that you get a chance to see our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard in West Plains. That's the Pizza Hut that supports this program. No other Pizza Hut in the country, just that one. You got to tell Bruce in there when you swing in there, hey, I heard about you from a mic on America's Voice Now. Thanks for supporting that show. Last but not least, make sure you call our friends at Battery Station. Visit them on the web, batterystation.com, or 417-257-7799. God bless.